Thousands of people on the street in the midnight and biting cold. Why? Because the then sitting president had just announced martial law. The whole world is just grappling what is happening, but perhaps the citizens have a fair idea of what they need to do. And they did it exactly that. Hundreds and thousands on the street, followed by 190 parliamentarians marching towards the parliament. Despite being prevented by the guards, they entered the building and they nullified the martial law. This is happening not in a country which is emerging, not a developing society, but one of the OECD countries. You would wonder how it was possible. It became possible because of the previous experiences and because of the quality of knowledge about one key notion, that is rule of law by the people. I'm talking about South Korea, and the city was Seoul. What is remarkable here is that the people recognized the complexity and the criticality of understanding rule of law. Damas and Herren, this is Sanjay Sharma, and you have just started watching your favorite program, Expaterience. Today, we have two segments for you. First one is on rule of law, and the second one on expat entrepreneurship. The question that we are asking today is not just how critical is rule of law for us, but also how critical is for our collective flourishing, for collective well-being, amidst the turbulences that we see today in the world, shifting global alliances, domestic politics is quite turbulent, and the technology changing rapidly. When we talk about rule of law, the general notion could be that it's a very static, very dry notion, courts, and constitutions. But if you realize it's a very living structure, living organism, where it breathes with us. It's like the same analogy. If you ask a fish, do you know water? Probably it would not be able to explain it. The moment you take it out, it says like, I want to go back where? But now perhaps it's already too late. And this is how it is about rule of law. It has a propensity and possibility of getting weakened very silently, fracture internally, and can collapse suddenly unless or if we leave it unattended or unsupervised. To unpack all these questions related to the theme, we have a wonderful panel today. And before I move forward, I would like to introduce them. This conversation joining us today is Marco de Jong. He is a former diplomat, advisory board member of ASEAN Chamber of EU, and he's also a CEO of Euralinks. Welcome, Marco, to the show.
Thank you.
Next, we have Fabrizio Guarliglia. He is the Director, International Development Law Organization, IDLO, the Hague branch. Welcome, Fabrizio, to the show.
Thank you so much.
And joining us is also Richard Gyasi. He is a Director of Geostat, the think tank on geopolitics, and he's a lecturer at the Institute of Political Science, Leiden University. Welcome.
Thank you.
And finally, I'm super delighted to have Valérie Gabach. She's co-director of Uprights, that focuses on human rights and advancement of rule of law-based programs. Welcome to you all. I would like to start with our city. We are sitting in The Hague, which used to be the home of the father of international law, Hugo Grotius, and also Spinoza, the philosopher of peace. I would like to ask each of you a very brief impression of what do you think Hague's significance and contribution is as international city of peace and justice. Marco, would you like to start?
Yes. The Hague is, in my personal opinion, creating a environment and the tools to uphold the rule of law. But it's up to if what they do with those rule of laws. You can see in the recent geopolitical developments that we've created these rule of laws, The Hague as a city of peace and justice, but it merely creates tools rather than the political will that is still needed.
Okay. Fabricio?
Yeah, I think that the Hague epitomizes what one could refer to as the international dimension of the rule of law, and in particular multilateralism as a means to ensure that disputes are resolved in a peaceful manner, to ensure that rights are consolidated and spread, that claims are properly enforced, that there is resort to a mechanism, and in The Hague, particularly judicial mechanisms, to obtain redress for the violation of rights. So in a way, it epitomizes a reaction to the rule of the mighty, a reaction to the idea that disputes should be resolved by force, and the strongest one wins. So in that sense, it retains even today a very strong symbolic message that perhaps is becoming now more necessary than ever before.
That's true, that's true. Richard, what do you say?
Those are good reflections. I actually wanted to use or refer to symbolism as well. Of course, it's important that The Hague, City of International Justice, rule of law, peace as well is there. But of course, in practice, it is quite limited. Think of Palestine, think of Venezuela, think of Libya. It's a long list. So in practice, quite limited, reflecting, of course, the nature of international law as it has always been limited.
True.
Yes, I mean, obviously my reflections would also be from the international perspective, so I would join a lot of what just say here. I think for me what also represents The Hague as a city of peace and justice is that I would say it's one of the very few places in the world where this justice is visible, because you have here, there's not so many international mechanisms to settle disputes and hold criminal accountable, but two of them, and the two main one, let's say, are here in The Hague, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. And I think in these times where international law and the rule of law at the international level is quite challenged, it's still a place where if you want to see it living, it is here. So I think it's quite important. It give it a living.
Absolutely. Actually, this was also interesting for me, the story that I just mentioned about of South Korea. And after this incident happened, I called a friend of mine and I asked him, what exactly does it mean to you? And the answer was very revealing, very basic, but very powerful. And they say, 이게 그냥 보통 개념이 아니라 법치주의는 국가 권력으로부터 그 개인의 자유와 권위를 보장하기 위해서 원리다. That means the rule of law is actually that protects you from the power, protects your rights, your freedom from the state power. So before we move forward, can we just quickly define these terms like rule of law and rule by law for our laymen, our viewers? Who would like to start with?
I would like to start.
Please, yeah.
So often people are mistaken with the rule of law as an ideal, but I see it more in a practical way, that it's merely about predictability. Society demands predictability from who's in power, and I think rule of law avoids the situation where power shifts, that also the rule of law changes. So it's all about predictability.
Okay. Fabricio?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. I think that legal certainty is part of the rule of law in what is called the thing version or the thing aspect of the rule of law, which is the rule of law as a protection, the rule of law as a barrier that shields us from predictability, the existence of an independent judiciary, our rights not to be taken from our homes and tossed into a dark cell somewhere. Roosevelt's freedoms, in the end, kind of like this idea that basically you're free from fear in the context of the rule of law. But then you have the other dimensions, which are as important. The idea that you can develop in an equal society, that basically you have equality of opportunities, that you have access to basic services, that you have access to sanitation, that you have access to everything that can lead you to a good life, that you are in a way, in a sense, given the opportunities to develop your life plan in a proper manner. And then there is an international dimension of rule of law, which we discussed earlier, right? So basically you have multiple aspects of the rule of law. It's a very multifaceted concept in many ways, which basically, if you analyze it properly, covers things as different as our rights in a criminal trial to our ability to petition to the municipality that, you know, our water is clean and drinkable for our children.
Perfect.
I think that predictability is core, as was mentioned. I think equality, that all are equal in the eye of law, whether it's domestic or international, is important. It brings, or it should bring, structure. Generally it does. Transparency, of course. Basically, if you want to simplify it, it's the rules of the road, right? And international society, to borrow from, say, Hedley Bull, requires as much as possible structure, predictability, and equality. So, in theory, that is international law, or at least what it should be.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat what was said. Obviously, predictability and equality are very fundamental notions under the rule of law. And maybe to respond to the idea that this should not be an abstract notion, but it's about also the concrete consequences. That's true that the rule of law as a concept will always be maybe an ideal or something abstract, but it gave us a framework of reference, I think, to build society on. And we're going to talk a lot about the international side of it, and the rule of law at the international level is very fragile. For me, at the level of the international level, it's really about avoiding chaos, right? Trying to give a little bit of predictability and avoiding arbitrariness. But I think at the national level, the rule of law, of course, is much more complex, right? The set of rules that we have that protect citizens against arbitrariness and powerful is much more developed. And sometimes I think it's important to... It seems like an abstract concept, but the reality is that it's so entrenched in everything the society that we've built in terms of predictability that we take it maybe in Europe a little bit for granted, and that it's important. We don't forget that's the reason why we could develop international partnerships and live our life as we do in the Netherlands is because there is the rule of law behind it.
While I was listening to you, I had to think of Hannah Arendt. She gives the concept of a banality of evil. And very vividly, she points out that heinous crimes are not committed by evil people. They are committed by ordinary people, mundane. But just these are the people who decided, or for some whatever reason, chose not to critically think, but follow blindly. And this happens in any society. It can happen if people are not aware of these concepts, how much pivotal they are to their own flourishing, collective flourishing. So my question to you all is, if you can reflect, do you think that we are teaching our youngsters these basic concepts? Because we are living in the age of STEM, science technologies, like highly, popularized. But the concepts like ethics, morality, philosophy, politics, do we have enough input for our youngsters so that they can understand that ultimate purpose of life is not just to get a job, but to live in a society where everybody can flourish?
Absolutely, if I may. I just wanted to also add as one of the key concepts of rule of law before order and coexistence. But on your question specifically, Sanjay, no, we don't. We teach them about a lot and quite often selectively. But look, in my book, The Nature of the Universe is harmony, is peace. War starts, conflict starts, acrimony starts. They all start one place, human mind. So what we actually need to study teach our youngsters is the nature of their mind. Obviously, we are completely remiss. There's a small handful of countries, think of Bhutan, that stress that a little more, but by and large, including in Europe, we don't. When I engage, for instance, with scholars, observers, analysts, including not too long ago, a fairly big name, works on international peace, and my question was, what is your definition of peace? That individual was not able to answer it. And so the fundamentals of peace, harmony, coexistence, of which international law, in my case, and international order, what I generally focus on, those underpin it. And those are the practical embodiments of it. But it's not the point of departure that they should be studying.
Yeah. So you do believe there is a dire need that we actually inculcate or bring a sizable chunk on these themes in the curriculum for youngsters at an early age?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What would you say, Fabrizio?
Yeah, I think there is the two dimensions there. One is how do we engage the youth in rule of law and rule of law conversations, and there's been a trend in recent years of ensuring adequate youth engagement, active youth engagement, in the sense that this is not something that can be decided by the older generation without adequate consultation and seeking the views and engaging the youth in being part of that conversation and proposing ideas and bringing initiatives to the table. So you have that. The second thing is what I think you were referring quite rightly as the educational aspect. How do we create new generations of rule of law thinkers and rule of law champions in this context? And I think that we are in a context where some red flags are starting to appear, in the sense of, for instance, social media creating a parallel dimension of normativization of behavior and transmission of values that run completely contrary to what we want to see in a rule of law context. So that is another big challenge for the coming generations, and I think, and we'll see what happens now with the new generations that grow completely, at the difference with our generation, in a digital world. Mm-hmm. We belong to the generation of still books and written word, with television and radio as the big innovations. We'll see now what happens when we look at the outcome of these processes in the coming generations and what are the implications for the rule of law.
Marco?
Yeah, and when you mention about the digitalization, I immediately was triggered like, okay, what information is real and what's not real? Yes. That's for the new generation so difficult to judge. I think more importantly is, we can have a curriculum where we teach the rule of law and how we would like to define it and share it. But I think the most important is that the world leaders give the right example. Otherwise, those are empty words. So I think that's very critical, that they keep faith in the rule of law that's being created. And that's why I also say it often is seen as an ideal, mm-hmm. but it's how you put it in practice.
Very well said. Actually, that again reminds me of the German theologian Martin Niemöller. He has written the poem, "First they came for the socialist, I was not a socialist, yes. So I did not speak out. Then they came for the communist, I was not. And when they came for me, nobody was left to help me." This is what is happening if we don't, or if we take it for granted, or if we have indifference or apathy for rule of law. So the question that we can ask, like, how would you read the incidents happening, say, Venezuela, or threats to Greenland or Taiwan, let alone there are 2 wars going on, rule of law? Please,
can
go ahead.
Start with that. So first, maybe just to frame a little bit, rule of law at the international level is to some degree in a very archaic or young form, since which mostly relates to the most concrete system is since the end of the Second World War, right? As a reaction of the Second World War, and it's hard to compare to the rule of law as we know it in a European country where it goes to a set of rules that are developed really important. At the international level, the rules are pretty basic to some degree, and they were built as a reaction to learning from history, right? That we do not want something like the Second World War to happen again. And the champion of that system and the one carrying it was the United States of America. It is far away from being perfect. It has never been fully implemented, and I don't think anyone would be naive to think that United States was not using the system for its own power before. But I think the main difference with what's happening with Trump America is that what Venezuela and Greenland and other actions before that is the lack of intention to even refer to international law and to just put ahead that most powerful should win, which is very problematic that it is the US because they are the one who have created that system. So, I mean, we're maybe not surprised when Russia invade Ukraine but when it comes from the US, it is more or less the people who created that system who is now pushing it to be destroyed. So it's very uncertain time, but it's very uncertain time. But that doesn't mean it's a phase. Maybe I don't know. Maybe we can go longer into that.
Yeah,
what I think of that.
I think that international law, and indeed led mostly by the US, collective West, including us here in Europe, was never quite meant to equalize at the international level. I think it was more of a stabilizer for an unequal system. Mm-hmm. I think what we here in Europe tend to forget, willingly or unwillingly, is that the US mostly, and there's another actor, that have violated international law again and again and again since 1945. We in Europe have generally been either compliant or complicit. We decided to close one eye or both eyes, and sometimes indeed partake. Libya comes to mind. I think what's changed now, and I think in that sense Trump and his movement, they continue this tradition, except the pretense or the pretext of human rights, freedom, liberalization. Those are gone. There's less sugarcoating. It's much more raw. But it is a continuation. I think the reason why we now, Venezuela was still, remember, there was only a couple of days ago, most of Europe remained silent. We only got vocal when we were not part of being protected. As long as we were in the corner where the punches didn't fall, the rest of the world got the punches, Europe was again compliant, complicit. But now that we are being threatened as well, we say, well, international law is being, trampled upon by Trump and his movement. I think that argument is flawed.
Yeah, I think I was going back to the history of the Peloponnesus War and Thucydides saying, well, what was Athens' international relations policy, and it was the strong do what they can and the wicked do what they must. We've had double standards in the international legal order forever, and I think Mark Carney's recent speech in Davos was interesting in the sense that we said, look, we always knew there was a degree of exceptionalism for great powers. I have a bit of I feel the picture is, I completely agree with you in the sense of saying there has always been this. I think that we had, in the words of Michael Walzer, constitutional moments in the evolution of international law. The 90s were a very particular moment because we saw a renaissance of multilateralism, pushed by middle states primarily. And you have some amazing hits like the Anti-Personal Landmines Treaty, or the treaty creating the International Criminal Court, which was revolutionary. And there, I would say it was against the will of the great powers that we got some of those milestones. I think that since September 11, what we see is an erosion, gradual, of multilateralism and of the international legal order, an increase in the double standards and the use of double standards, and now we're in a situation where that has become exacerbated. And we see asymmetrical reaction to violations of international norms. We see sometimes, shameless infraction to the rules of international law, the provision of the use of force, and violations of human rights law and international humanitarian law in a fashion that we thought we were never going to see again, and muted responses or variable responses depending on who the actor behind the violations is. I think that there is obviously the only thing that one can do is refuse to normalize that situation. And continue to stand by the values behind multilateralism, behind the UN Charter, behind the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, the basic constitutional elements of our fragmented international rule of law world, and really demand for different actions and different reactions.
Marco, do you share the same thoughts, or?
Yeah, problems arise when rules become selective or optional, and that affects also geopolitics, trade. From my own experience, look at the Deforestation Act. In the negotiations with the Asian countries. There you see that there's conflict with the WTO and the rule of law that we like to see. So there's always a tension between what's in place, what is the goal, and is it in harmony with the other parties, or is it imposed on the other parties?
Precisely. I think that that's a good point, because that reminds me of the Asian financial crisis of 97, 98, when Korea was given IMF bailout package, and the terms and conditions were too stringent. Later, yes, even IMF admitted that vis-a-vis countries like Mexico or Brazil. So that has been actually very nicely captured. You mentioned about Canadian Prime Minister Carney, and I wrote down, so just for the sake of our viewers, he said, "We knew that the story of rules-based international order was partially false. This fiction was useful. The trade rules were enforced asymmetrically, and we know that the international law was applied depending on the identity of the accused or victim. We participated in the ritual. We avoided calling the gap between rhetoric and reality, and we got benefited." So it's a very, open and clear expression that we were part of it. Now the next question, yes, that has happened and we are aware. And the question is, taking the computer lingo, do you think a reboot or reinstallation of the software is sufficient, or we need to actually have a new operating system for the world? Just tweaking is not sufficient anymore. What would you say? Yeah.
Well, if I may, look, a couple of things. One is that international order, of which international law is a part, by and large has done quite a bit of good as well. Let's say it's avoided great power wars. Since the end of the Second World War, they have not fought each other directly. That's a major achievement. By and large, prosperity worldwide, peace worldwide, by and large, lately a little less so perhaps, have been positive. International law, by and large, also send a package, we order something from overseas, internet, travel, and so on. By and large, they work as well. Almost all countries in the world, most of the time, abide by international law as well. Where you see the violations, it's mostly the larger actors, sometimes domestically, but when it comes to violence and power, right, that's where international law tends to fail. Of course, international law is not a sovereign, so it doesn't have that kind of curbing power. I think a reboot in that regard is not necessary. Of course, norms, we see that there's a contestation going on. China is a lead in that, India is a lead in that, others which propose new norms. You see indivisible security, shared future, world as one family, all very positive. I think the biggest challenge, of course, still lies at that, apex of violence and power. That, unfortunately, international law will most likely have difficulty dealing with. It seems that power is generally either curbed by their own morality, which unfortunately quite often is missing, or by counterpower. It can be asymmetric, doesn't need to be. But it's important, and in conclusion, that not only the middle powers, such as Prime Minister Carney has propagated, which is important, get together, but the middle powers alone will not be sufficient. So doing this together with the major powers, with India, with China, with Brazil and others, will remain key.
Yeah,
I think, one thing that IDLO keeps repeating is the importance of, preserving multilateralism as a value and as a process, and in many ways. But another thing that basically our Director General has been repeating many times is, look, the rule of law is the immune system of democracy, and it retains this critical function. But at the same time, it has to be acknowledged that basically there are a number of unsatisfied demands that are leading to an increase in authoritarianism, are leading to a decrease in violent responses to different issues. And I think that if there is a reboot that is required, perhaps at the international level will be a more equal and symmetric and predictable international legal order, and a reaffirmation of the importance of the international norms underpinning the international legal order. At the domestic level, the democracies have to start to deliver in relation to the problems that people are experiencing: housing, access to sanitation, access to public services, affordability, ability to basically raise your family in a proper manner. These are the concerns that people are having. Impunity for corruption, vulnerability to organized crime. A number of things that ultimately, at the end of the day, if they're not properly addressed by democratic systems and by rule of law-based orders, they end up basically creating a fertile ground for autocratic responses, populism, and with that comes the rest.
Here, actually, I would just like to have a follow-up question. Generally, people don't really understand how to detect those cracks in the system. And if I can take the analogy from the aviation sector, if you look at any crash investigation, they talk about that the crash itself was the outcome, but it was a chain reaction of many small misses, whether it was a technical glitch, whether it's like a pilot's complacency or a human error or just negligence in the maintenance or anything. That those are small things which are manageable, but when put together, compounded, they end up in disaster, catastrophe. So can you pinpoint some of the cracks within rule of law that people can actually start seeing that, hey, we need to be very careful and in time? Who would like to take? Yeah?
Some of the cracks. I think a very obvious one of the cracks of what we are seeing in the rule of law or the international law, and again I repeat, it's because I think because of their power and the fact that they were the one holding that systems, it creates a very visible, massive crack in that system, right? But obviously that is, to me, just what makes it visible. And as it was said before, it was already there, and there's a number of cracks that we can already see in the system for numbers of years, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the situation in Israel, Palestine, and also the way states have been or not reacting towards that. So clearly there is a shift here, but it's also at the national level. I have to say, it seems that there is a tendency for national to turn back a bit, maybe toward themselves. We also see it in Europe a lot around the discussion around the migration route and the Mediterranean area, which is something we worked on, and how we deal with this question very differently than 20 years ago, maybe. Although for me, if we're talking about rebooting the system, I don't know if we are there yet. I'm a little bit of an idealistic, so I would hope that the system that we have now would reboot in a way that push for the value that my organization is pushing for. So more rule of law, actually, and more human rights, and less war, and less for the citizen of the world, a better place to live that is a little bit more equal. But I don't know if we're really there yet.
Marco, what do you think?
Yeah, that the system mainly came from the US and that we followed in that sense. When you take the Greenland, that was for Europe the red line that the US crossed. So there we there we pointed out, like, now you cross the line. So that comes also from our inner European rule of law. Mm-hmm. So it's also kind of a mechanism that that comes into effect when we see, okay, this is our rule of law, even though it originates from the US. So in that sense, I don't think we need a total new reset. It will create even more chaos, only because of the US is not following the rule of law that we used to.
And I mean, some you mentioned a number of success of the importance of international law, because we always see the negative and not the positive, right? Also, something that I think is quite very interesting is something that when we studied international law would have not even been conceivable. But for instance, the International Court of Justice have been used in recent years by states that doesn't have a direct interest in the dispute. Okay. Like for Syria under the torture conventions, for the genocide in Myanmar by Gambia. So the reason why Gambia pushed that is because they felt it's unfair that no one is pushing that at the international level. They have no direct interest in trying to have recognized the genocide in Myanmar, you know. So and this is something that was, I think, inconceivable 20 years ago, and is a very big achievement of it. Where that's going, I don't know, but there's a clear message from some states that they are not heard, and they want to be heard within the international framework, and I think that's a very important one. See, if I want to look at the positive side and why the system is still have tools that we can use, maybe. Yeah.
Is it also your experience?
No, I completely agree with Valerie. I think that we have, in a way, more avenues open for redress for victims than we had, 20 years ago. I think that basically is absolutely right, that the creative use that is being made of the International Court of Justice is something that unprecedented in many ways. I mean, the International Court of Justice used to be an arcane, sleepy jurisdiction dealing with issues, connected to fisheries and continental shelves. And now we have, this dynamic in order to obtain redress for victims of massive international human rights law and international humanitarian law violations. The issue there is going to be, as usual, that is the second problem that we see, and I think that this is ICRAC as well, is kind of like what is the normative weight of the judgments coming from these bodies. And I think that over time what we are seeing is an erosion of the authoritative value of judicial decisions at the international level. So rulings from the European Court of Human Rights historically have been disregarded by some recalcitrant states. Cooperation with international criminal tribunals has always been a type of menu that the states decide when to, which plates they're going to choose and when to cooperate and when they decide to ignore. Binding requests for assistance, support for international criminal tribunals or other international mechanisms has been variable. And now we see that, a very easy solution is simply to ignore what the International Court of Justice says. And you get away with that. So that is a crack, because at the end of the day, obviously, enforcement has always been the Achilles heel of international law. But now I think we're seeing something else, which is kind of like a sort of disregard for the for those bodies that we have vested with authority to decide on these issues.
That's a very good point. Richard, probably you can fill us with it. Generally, what we are observing is that, if my interests are not fulfilled, then I just don't want to be part of this organization, which we have recently seen. US has withdrawn from almost like 65 organizations. These are important ones. And before that, we have also seen CTBT or NPT, which were not ratified by the US. And I'm talking about probably 90s or so, early 90s. So the question is, what repercussions should it have if some of the countries, or especially the powerful countries, if they don't, follow the rule? Is it because the inbuilt helplessness in international law that we don't have, any force behind it?
I would say so. Of course, that disregard that was mentioned is worrisome. Again, to stress, it's not new. It's quite often been there. The Global South has been complaining about it, since time immemorial. Generally, we've said, let us think about it. We'll get back to you. You see that the legitimacy of international law has been affected as well. Indeed, countries asking themselves, is this helpful? What is this doing to me? I have complaints, but, it doesn't result in... I think, by and large, what you called that a living organism, right? International law, rule of law. That's indeed what it is. It's also subject to interpretation, subject to contestation. I think we see that unfolding. Sometimes people think that rule of law is as simple as, red light, you're not supposed to cross it, you get a fine. International law, for instance, there is a bit more wiggle room and room for interpretation as well. I think you see that process unfolding. I think by far most of the countries, and importantly, besides the US, because Trump's clearly said, international law. Not for me, not for us. The other major actors, most of them, EU, India, China, Brazil, virtually all the middle powers, all the EU member states, much of the Global South is very much interested in sustaining it, in improving it where due. Of course, that improvement, that reform is something they've been complaining about, whether it's the P5, whether it's the US as a gatekeeper at the WTO, IMF, World Bank, certain veto powers. I think we're in the middle of that process. Of course, if the largest actor by most measures, the US, when it comes to some of the most fundamental issues, econ, security, military force, violence, doesn't play ball, and most likely for now we can presume that this whole MAGA philosophy will endure in some form or another, that is worrisome. But if the rest of the world, most and large, does, and they can and they want, I think that's positive.
I was trying to think of what you said, and now I lost my train of thought. What I think is important, and I think the reason why most of the states are still attached to multilateralism and international law is because at the end of the day, those rules are quite protective of states, state sovereignty, the borders. The basic rules is leave your neighbor alone, right? That's basically what we are asking, and then we can build cooperation on that. And so obviously, like something like what happened in Venezuela now is problematic for the basic rule of international law, right? Because not only you intervene in the internal affair of foreign states, but also you completely disregard head of state immunity, you know, which in other contexts I may not defend in the context of international crimes or something. Yeah. But in this context, I think we are forgetting a little bit that these rules are primarily meant to protect the states so that they can then build some kind of cooperation that will then help the citizens. So I think it's totally normal that to some degree multilateralism will remain, you know, because most states have interest into it, especially the ones that are not the most powerful, and that's also short-term thinking, right? Now I'm the most powerful, so I don't care, but what about tomorrow, you know? And then there was another point I wanted to make, but I forgot. So maybe
no, but I think that's very quite relevant. That reminds me of Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, and I think probably he emphasized that social contract theory simply because of it. Whatever he observed in, I think, 16th century England, and he writes that in the state of nature, when there is no law, the life is short, nasty, and brutish. So irrespective of which form you have, it's better to have some kind of contract, and I think that's where your point is quite relevant.
Yeah, and now it came back. I also think it's really hard to imagine a world without this multilateralism and cooperation between states. I mean, the world is getting more international by the day, right? The issues that we have to deal with are global. The whole economy is interconnected. The global pandemic, the global warming is not something we can solve at the national level. All of this issue is, it's hard to imagine that this can be done without international law. So, yeah, so I guess it's for citizens wherever we are, in the West, especially in the European Union, we are dependent of this system. We are completely interlinked with it. So I think the solution doesn't come from closing down to your national border and thinking individually, but to think as a community, you know.
And if I may add to that,
please.
Of course, thinking of a community for a long time wasn't the case. For the last 500 years, the West, have dominated disproportionately a lot of the other, because don't forget, concepts like order, law, rule of law, international law, also have their origins in civilizational principles and values. And it was the West that has dominated much of the last few hundred years. And now you see civilizational states, India, China, but also pockets of the Islamic world, who are now regaining confidence and agency indeed, to add value to international law and how that's interpreted and how that is applied. That, of course, should be considered as very positive. Because if international law is mostly seen as the product of 12% of world's population, the West, it will always lack the legitimacy by the other 88. They need to see their own principles and values reflected in international law. So in that regard, a potentially most constructive transitionary period, especially with Uncle Sam stepping back.
So could we say that this could also be a short-sightedness on part of the powerful nations at the moment? Because, I mean, as you see in the car, the window mirror, it says objects may be closer than than they appear. So this cracks in rule of law could also come back to bite someday. And we have seen this time a little bit retreat from the Greenland rhetoric, in the Davos conference. Do you think that's also?
Yeah, I think at the end it's very positive that we find US. There was never a real European feeling. We always felt like in some way connected to the US. So I think what you mentioned, the shift of power of the Western world, directly is linked with the cracks that we see now in the law of rule.
Yeah, rule of law. Any thoughts on this? Oh, you're fine. I have this thought, and I just want, because we are left with a little bit time. If a country has elections, has courts, and has laws, but there is no trust among the public, is it still the rule of law?
Well, I also heard at the table that the rule of law is connected to democracy. Mm-hmm. But if you ask the Chinese leaders, do we have a rule of law? They will also say, yes, we have also laws in place. Yeah. So you can have a debate on what does it mean, rule of law. Is it how the Western world is looking at it? Yeah. Or does it mean that the political leaders cannot overrule the law? Or is it there are laws in place who gives their people predictability and trust? Mm-hmm. So that is a whole debate in itself.
Okay.
I think the World Justice Project has a rule of law index that they publish every year. Mm-hmm. Basically, look at different states and see how they're doing throughout, a range of different indicators, with the usual champions: Norway, Denmark, Sweden, at the top, New Zealand. Which is interesting because when you look at the Human Development Index, the same countries are also at the top. So there is kind of like there is a direct connection between quality of life, ability to develop your life in a proper manner with the amount of rule of law that you're getting as an average citizen. But the issue of trust is clear there, and I think that one thing that we do in IDLO, and I think is a key component of our work, is you work with local justice actors. Because a number of times what ends up happening is kind of like the lack of trust also revolves around politicization of the judiciary, for instance, or bureaucratization of the judiciary, like lack of responses in terms of the ability to solve a dispute within a reasonable period of time. And therefore, people basically, when we're talking about, for instance, a pastoral society in Western Africa where land disputes are frequent, if you don't have proper dispute resolution mechanisms at the grassroots level, at the local level, then the rest of the rule of law conversation becomes somewhat abstract, right? I mean, you're not really solving people's problems. So I think that there is an issue there in terms of, how do institutions respond to the concrete needs of people? Just to give you a sense, what has been measured is that the vast majority of the conflicts in the world are not solved by the judicial system, but by customary and informal justice systems. So community justice, tribal justice mechanisms. So how do you basically, sometimes the best thing that you can do is work with those systems to improve them, to empower them, and to basically include them within the traditional justice response to this type of conflicts. So I think that for me the question there also becomes an issue in terms of how do you rebuild trust. And sometimes, that requires, having a clinical look at your institutions, how they're working at the macro and at the micro level, and basically engaging with those institutions and making them deliver for the people. That is an essential component.
Yeah, I would like to add something to that. If we measure the rule of law on predictability and accountability and reflect that to the people, like you questioned, then there are countries that if you look at the US, which is now very unpredictable, so there are authoritarian states that offers their people much more predictability and accountability than currently the US. So that's something to take on.
Absolutely.
I think for me clearly the answer is no. You can completely have a system which have laws, system in place, even elections, and that are not also, because that still is the power that is using this law, not that they are bound by this law, right? That's where the difference lies. Maybe to close back to your example at the beginning, when you were giving the example of South Korea, which is a very powerful example where the rule of law is implemented by the people themselves, And you look at the situation in Iran right now, which is that's the first thought that came to my mind when you were giving this example. is exactly the opposite. You have a system in place. You have very functional court in Iran. I mean, or legal system to be implemented. You have people in the streets, and then we know the very grave situation right now for the people, the excessive use of force against the people that is unprecedented. And so that's, to me, is exactly the example of a system where it's ruled by law, but on the benefit of the powerful, right? Not.
So it's not rule of law,
So
in your opinion?
No.
No. Richard?
In a very unpredictable society, of course.
Yes, of course.
No, very briefly, if that system is effective, fair, and transparent, as it is in much of our part of the world here, and countries also mentioned here, Fabricio, then that absolutely the trust will be there. And I think Scandinavia in particular, but also Holland, where we sit, the indices and other metrics show that.
So you're saying if these 2-3 elements are there, the trust is also bound to be there?
By and large, yes.
Is it
by and large?
By and
fair,
large.
effective, transparent. Example of the US that was given. Of course, it's no longer entirely fair or effective or transparent, and you see that trust eroding.
Well, I think we have just 3 minutes left, so it's a just very wonderful conversation, and I wanted to go on and on. But say if the elected governments, they themselves undermine the rule of law, what can be done to stop them? Who would like to start?
Well, that's to some degree what we are doing as civil society, working on human rights and trying to use international law. So we work a lot with partners that are working in countries, activists in the countries, documenting those violations committed against their citizens at the national level. And obviously, if there is no will for it to be addressed at the national level, the only tools you are left with is international law with its weaknesses. But I think international law can be one of these tools that we are trying to use to put pressure on those states that are not respecting basic rights for the people at the international level.
Yeah, what we have done in ID law is in context of erosion of the rule of law and basically transitions to autocratic governments is try to work with the judiciary to the extent that the judiciary can still operate as a bulk work of the rule of law and offer a degree of protection, empower justice seekers, just work with the local bar associations, give lawyers the capacity and the means to be able to defend the rights of people in a rarefied atmosphere. In some countries, we have to basically abandon working with the governments altogether and just shift to support civil society and to try to basically make sure that we can for instance, support the women and girls in contexts where there is widespread gender violence. So I think that you have to find the way and define the strategy around the country you're dealing with, that particular its structures and then act accordingly.
Richard, 10 seconds.
1 second, even I have little to add.
So you and Marco.
Little to add.
No. Okay. Well. I think I would like to thank you all very much for sparing time with us, Marco, Fabricio, Richard, and Valerie, for this engaging and insightful conversation. With this, we come to the end of our first segment, but stay tuned for our next one shortly with Julie Taylor on expat entrepreneurship. Before I leave, I would like to thank you all sitting there at home watching us, to invite you to join me again for our local election special on Saturday, February 28th. Until then, take very good care of yourself and your loved ones. This is Sanjay Sharma. Bye for now.
Yay! Hi, I'm Julie Taylor, founder of Buzz Business Networking, an accountability coach supporting solo business owners across the Netherlands. Like many others, I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I didn't plan to run a business, but I've embraced the challenge since moving here 7 years ago. This was to support my husband's career. I now work with hundreds of expat entrepreneurs who are talented, ambitious, and full of ideas, yet often overwhelmed by Dutch regulations, cultural differences, and the challenge of building a network from scratch. My goal today is to shine a light on the realities expat founders face and the support they truly need to thrive. Today we're here to discuss the untold story of expat entrepreneurs, and I'm joined today by my 4 wonderful experts who see these challenges up close every day. We have with us today Adina Petri. She is a trauma therapist and high-performance coach. She helps entrepreneurs grow their businesses by working at the intersection of trauma recovery and high-performance strategy. No problem. Her approach is practical and deeply personalised, built around the identity of the founder, not a template of what a business owner should be. She is a mentor for female ventures, a lecturer at Maastricht University on high performance and burnout prevention, and she runs her own business in the Netherlands for over 15 years. We also have with us Hans Devling. He's the founder of Advictus. He's an accountant, a very experienced accountant and tax advisor with many years' experience with business owners from many countries and backgrounds. Great to have you here. We also have Dr. Sinead Hewson, founder of Unconventional Innovators. She's the founder of impact startup Unconventional Innovators. She works internationally on transformation, innovation and high performance. She's a mentor with We Are Changemakers and lectures on entrepreneurship, leadership and sustainability at Webster University Leiden campus. Great to have you here. I'm very new to the Netherlands. Nikia Brown. Nikia is a global leader, social designer and public speaker. She moves here from the US in 2025 to launch her social impact advisory firm Roots and Rivers Collective. She utilises human-centred design to partner with people and organisations to solve complex problems, grow in their personal development and engage in generative dialogue. Welcome, great to have you all today. But first, we all know business can be a funny thing. So we're going to go over to Ampuma to find out more.
Yeah. Hi, good morning, everyone. Great to be back here. For last 2 episodes, the program director, Dennis, he banned me. Yeah, he literally asked me not to perform. Apparently, a few of my jokes hit him hard. So yeah, I'm ready to be banned a few more times, Dennis. So today we are discussing about solo expat entrepreneurs, which is funny because I'm not even an entrepreneur. I am into purchase and supply chain, logistics. So yeah, I don't chase dreams. Yeah, expat here are either entrepreneur or thinking about becoming one. I do not know why. So yeah, being an entrepreneur is really amazing. Everybody respect work-life balance, except the tax office. The Dutch government is like, please take time for yourself, and here are the 47 letters. Each one was due yesterday, by the way. Yeah, people are very busy doing their job in entrepreneurship. I think it's been the easy job. It's not that easy. Yeah, I tried.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, yeah. I know that can be a little hard. So, and the good thing is solo entrepreneurs mostly work from home. They prefer to, which means your boss is you. HR is also you. And HR is kind of toxic. So you don't find, it's 9:04, disappointed. Yeah, everything is digital here, which is great. It sounds great until Digity enters the room. Digity is not a login system. It's a test of your character. Enter your password. Now your phone number. Now your other phone number. Now answer to a question Only you don't know. At what time on a Tuesday on 2015 did you last feel confident? And you're like, ouch. Okay, and ultimately it says login failed. I mean, of course it did fail. I mean, I've grown as a person since I started the login process. Yeah, I mean, in Netherlands, everybody bikes, which is great. But biking for an expat can be a bit stressful. I mean, on the other day, I mean, Dutch people don't just bike. They commute at war speed. On the other day, I was like, wow, look at that beautiful canal. And behind me, dang, 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 move. I never knew a cycle bell could sound that judgmental. Oh my God. I mean, I come from India. Okay. So my family back home, they love my job. They don't understand it full, but because it sounds stable, which is the highest compliment in Indian culture. Yeah, I mean, it's really fun. They say entrepreneurs means freedom, but I think what it actually means is a laptop, a website, and enough anxiety to be qualified as a second job. Yeah. Now I'm going to talk about the dating life of entrepreneurs. So that's fun too. And I find a similarity with my job in here. So I think the dating life of entrepreneur is a lot like logistics. Yeah, it's technically possible, but constantly postponed due to capacity constraints. And by the time when it's available, you've already moved on. So you don't care that much. Yeah. And now I'm going to draw the contrast between the entrepreneurs and the supply chain people like me. So entrepreneurs casually say, yeah, we'll figure it out, no problem. Figure out what? When exactly? I mean, that sentence gives me stress rush. Literally, it's like someone out there's a person who looked at Greenland and, yeah, I want that, I could manage that. That's entrepreneurial confidence with some ego. That's keep it aside. But supply chain confidence looked at Greenland and say, nah, too cold, too remote, no adult supervision, no backup plan, hard pass. Nah. So yeah, I mean, entrepreneurs, they'll jump off the cliff and build a parachute midway. I mean, while they're way down. And supply chain people will check the wind speed, material quality, parachute supplier, and then decide not to jump. Yeah. Entrepreneurs says, oh, I don't need contract. I mean, that's adorable because I love contracts. Contracts are like giant hug, but legal. So yeah, and they said, no, I trust this supplier. I said, have you ever met them after payment? Ever? I mean, that could be a completely different person. Yeah, entrepreneur says, I love disruption. They like disruptions. And in supply chains world, disruption means someone forgot to scan a pallet. And now 3 countries are panicking, same word, but different trauma. Yeah, I mean, entrepreneurs are easy to go with. So while we celebrate all the entrepreneurs here, I mean, you guys, respect. Seriously, you guys build things, you take risk, you live on courage and Wi-Fi. Yeah, some of us are here to reduce the risk, read the fine print, increase efficiency, and make sure that product actually shows up. I mean, someone has to be the adult here, and clearly it wasn't you. So thank you so much, and have a lovely weekend. And yeah, one last thing, sorry. To all the entrepreneurs, I would want to say that hope is optional, but risk is always mandatory. Be the adult at least one time. Thank you so much, and over to you, Julie.
Thank you. Oh, there was some painful home truths there, wasn't there? There really was. The Netherlands is known for innovation, opportunity, and a strong startup ecosystem. English is widely spoken, but yet many internationals, expats, non-Dutch, still struggle with the basics of starting and growing a business owners. The number one thing people struggle with, finding clients, even when they're highly skilled. So let's start here. So, what's the very first barrier you see them hit? What did you experience? And what does it catch so many people off guard with? Who wants to start? I'm going to go to Nikia. She's fresh in the country. Have you got your first client yet?
Yes, actually. I have worked with 2 clients so far. So as you say, I'm quite new. I arrived to the Netherlands a little less than a year ago and established Roots and Rivers Collective in July of last year. So she's 6 months young. And I received my first client, or met my first client, in a very unconventional way. So I think, to answer your question, the honest answer is like we just don't know where to look. You get here, you don't really know the entrepreneurship ecosystem, you haven't really built a community. So it's like, where do I go to, one, find that community, and then how can I, especially if my business is new, represent my organization, my company with confidence so that it's compelling enough to convince, right, persuade someone to trust me. And provide a service that they actually want and will find valuable. And thankfully, the way I met my first client was an unconventional way. I wasn't even pitching myself. I went to a networking event. We were doing the traditional round robin of introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about your business, what brought you to the Netherlands. And I shared that I offered public speaking services. And the person that was across from me at the end of that first round leaned in and said, I want to talk to you more about that. And that's how I landed my first client. So I think it can come in non-transactional ways with you just showing up, being present, and really just demonstrating the value of your company and your services.
Love it. Yeah. I love the unconventional ways. It makes me want to come over to you, Sinead, with the word unconventional. So what challenges do you see about people gaining that very first client?
I think what you have to remember is if you've had a business in another country that, certain things are the same, but culturally it's different here. And you need to take time to get to know people. So it isn't a case of just kind of coming in, making a pitch and you get the work. You've got to get to know people and build those relationships. And I think we underestimate that. So we might be speaking English, but the way we interpret the language can be very different. So just get to know people and go to networking events. Virtual is great, but if you meet people in person, you have time for those kind of aside conversations to help you move forward. So for me, my first client came through where I came here, I knew nobody. I married into a Dutch family and no one had an entrepreneurial background. And I knew nobody. And I came from a place where I knew instinctively where to get a photographer, a lawyer, all those things, and I had nothing. So I joined the Women's Business Initiative here in The Hague, and that was a great way in getting some professional services and just going to events where you don't feel like you're the stranger in the room. But I also joined the Ireland-Netherlands Business Association, and through that I was able to gradually get introduced into different organisations, and it was because you're able to just interact. And now I'm in places like We Are Changemakers, which works a lot with social entrepreneurship, and you just have to build up those relationships, but it takes time and you've got to be patient. And just because you're an expert at a particular topic in one country doesn't mean it's going to be accepted here. You've got to build the trust, and that takes time.
Yeah, the know-like trust, isn't it? So I want to come over to Hans now, because you get to see the wide variance of different business owners at different times. What do they say to you about how they find their first client?
Well, our experience is that a lot of clients who start their business in the Netherlands, they already made a plan, of course, before they come here. And a lot of them, they take their own clients from abroad with them. Because a lot of people can work remotely. So if we have people from Brazil, they have still Brazilian clients. If they're from Germany, they still have connected to Germany. So we will see, and especially US, we have a lot of US clients at the moment, I think because of the situation in the US. and we have this DAFT visa, which is a pretty easy way to get a permit in the Netherlands. And so we'll see when they, what we see is when they start, they use a lot of their old network, and then they start to build it in the Netherlands. But I think networking is key for people who arrive in network, because sometimes we have what I told you about the Brazilian clients. We had Brazilian clients, and suddenly we get 10 new applications for Brazilian clients, and then with the Brexit we had 12 new Brexit clients. So every time when something happens in the world, we get clients. So it is, and I think we're in some circle where I'm not aware of. but we're in some circle where people start to contact us. So.
Yeah.
So networking is important.
Recommendation is really important, and that's one of the drivers here in the Netherlands as well.
Yeah, definitely. Adina, how did you feel about finding your first client here, and what do you hear from people as well?
I think for me, when I look at how the entrepreneurial journey has gone, I always have, of course, the psychological component in mind. And building up on something that Sinead said earlier, I think one core distinction between expats is to figure out if you're coming from a background that has a collectivist type of society versus an individualistic one. Because then, when you arrive in this country, things are going to go a little bit different for you. For example, I'm from Romania, and that's a collectivist society. I'm used to moving in a herd, not by myself. And that's how I started my entrepreneurial journey, actually. It was with a bunch of friends that took me with them to an entrepreneurial conference. I got inspired, and then the same three of us went to the Chamber of Commerce and registered together our business. Exactly. Yeah. So we're used to doing things together, and we're used to building on relationships. It's important to have this token of trust transfer from one to another. And as a trauma therapist, I also look at the baggage that a person brings, because being an expat usually comes with baggage. The majority of us didn't leave our country because it was so good over there. It's usually something that there's something, a strain of some sort or a difficulty that by relocating you're trying to overcome. So when I look at these things, I'm also looking at how people enter the Dutch market and what kind of expectations they have. And one of the things is that in this society where people are a bit more autonomous, a little bit more individualistic, basically you're expected to find your own way and to figure out your own things. But when you come here and you are already loaded a little bit with the stress of, am I going to make it in this new country, in this adverse territory, then I think the safest bet is indeed to go through networking, through establishing some connections, some relationships that are going to carry you through those initial steps, which can feel very unnerving for anybody.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to my next question, which is, from my experience, registering the KVK, the Chamber of Commerce, is very straightforward. But what strategies actually help expat entrepreneurs stay consistent and confident when dealing with Dutch taxes, rules and business obligations? I really do try and avoid by saying it's easy. Anything's easy when you know how. I'll say it's easy when you do know how. So what tips would you like to share with the listeners today? I'm going to start with you, because this is definitely your area of expertise.
What my experience is that especially people, when they start opening their business, they're really a little bit nervous about the tax system. They want to know everything. Well, I have almost 40 years of experience, and my knowledge just didn't happen overnight. So they ask a lot of questions, and a lot of them, they want to know how the income tax works. But that's actually not the most important one, because you're only dealing with income tax at the end of the year, so one time in a year. But with VAT, you deal every day. So VAT is a little bit more complicated. And I always tell clients, look, your taxes and your bookkeeping and your accounting is a process which you evaluate. Because in the beginning you have plans, this is what I'm going to do, and you end up with different things you're going to do. So I think that it is better to concentrate on your work than to concentrate on these tax things, because that we can solve for you. So and don't try to invent the wheel again, because that's not necessary. Because if you call us or you call any accountant, they can right away help you, and in 1 minute they can give you an answer. And so if you start worrying about things, that's not necessary. And we find out that one who are over-organized, they want to know everything, who have for spreadsheets for everything, you name it and they have a spreadsheet. And we have clients who think, okay, here you have everything I want. If you want more, please let me know. And those clients are actually the best, but the most easy for us to work with. And they don't do worse or better than the other client. So it is a little bit how you are into the game, and so I think to be relaxed and to leave everything to the expert. And of course, we explain everything if you want to have an explanation why it is. But if somebody asks me, "Can you explain me how the VAT works?" That's pretty complicated because for each situation there is a different there's a different scenario. So that's my. But the taxes in Holland is, and also if you make, people are afraid to make a mistake, or there are no mistakes. We can only have solutions. That's a little bit how it works. And the Dutch tax authorities are pretty okay to work with.
Yeah.
So they're not like the police, or they're for punishment or nothing. If we have clients who submitted a little bit too late, we write a letter and said, okay, it is a little bit too late, but still, can you? And then they say, okay, no problem. So no worries.
It does really depend a little bit on your background, right? Because again, when I look at my situation, I come from this country where authority is something to fear, is something that you're distant from, it's something that's not your friend, right? And this for me was something that I had to adapt to the mentality of here and understand that actually the tax office wants me to succeed. It wants my business to do well because, of course, there are benefits later. And in the beginning, if you come from such an authoritarian regime, you're going to be afraid of these kind of interactions, and you're going to try to distance yourself from them as much as possible, which, again, I think it's detrimental, first of all, because a nervous system that is wired in hypervigilance is more likely to make mistakes, whereas if people relax a little bit more and take things step by step and do inform themselves, they are more likely to land in a secure spot.
Yeah. And I think, my wife, she's from Russia, so she has the same problem as you have with authorities. And for us, and I think in Holland, I think it is typical Dutch that we don't worry too much about authorities at all, And if they do something we don't agree to, we right away start to write letters and complaints and objections. So that is how we do it.
Yes, because your rights are respected here by the authorities.
For some, but we also have some problems in the Netherlands. So it is not all. But still, it is it is not like it is just somebody who has a different job than I have. So that's all. That's not.
I think one of the things with it as well is that yes, the tax authorities I find are very good to work with, but you have to be really transparent. You have to have your paperwork in order. So one of the differences, for example, between setting up here and say a country like Ireland is that you have a year to set up everything. So we have a year to put your registration and all of these things. I had to have everything in place before I started my business, and then I had to gradually get everything in order. But what I would say, if I was giving any piece of advice, is employ a good tax advisor and an accountant to help you with your work. The Dutch tax system is one of the few areas where there's no translation into another language because there's always a risk of misinterpretation. So having somebody who understands the nuances but also understands an international perspective is important. Make sure with taxes, with any aspect of these finances, it's about being organised. Just be organised and get things done. And I'm a terrible procrastinator when it comes to my finances. But I automated as much as I could. So I use things like QuickBooks, where I can put all of my invoicing in. It's connected to my bank account. So it means that your accountant can go in and look at these things. So you don't do things for free. And Hans, it's a very important piece of advice that you gave yesterday when we were preparing for this, which is actually don't use AI as your expert.
Yes.
It makes a lot of errors. Yes. And I think when you talk to a tax advisor and a financial advisor who knows what they're talking about, okay, that it makes a huge difference, because then you go, okay, I can actually say, write in a besvar tegen iets, so you can say this isn't correct because of A, B, and C. So I have a lot of work where I would work with intra-EU invoices, so I have zero VAT, but I have to prove that organisation exists, that they have a number, etc. So once you know that and you provide the information, it's fine. You are here temporarily, for example, and you want to go to another country, you have a clear set of books and process that is very transparent to the Dutch system. So I always say to people, it's a great place to do business, but get your paperwork in order.
Yes. Definitely.
My number one advice here would be do not postpone and do not ignore the blue envelope.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah. Don't feel the fear when the blue envelope comes through.
Just address it as quickly as possible. But especially the blue one.
Definitely. And also, I say to business owners when they start is you do need to try every part of your business. If you're not a marketing specialist, you need to try and learn until you find you don't want to do it anymore. And like we said, there's some areas you might want to brainstorm with AI, but this is not the one, and maybe legal things as well. So try areas, and then when you hit that comfort zone where you're just like, this is not for me, that's when you get an expert in. So double tax, do you get? Is that with the US as well? Do you have to pay taxes there? Now you're here?
Yes,
yeah.
Both. So I am on the DAF. You mentioned the DAF, which is the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty. And so I knew that was going to be the route that I would pursue upon coming here. So I did a lot of research, and everything I read sounded very counterintuitive. It's just like, buy a one-way ticket, go there, you'll figure it out when you land. And I was like, are you sure? I was like, okay. But I anticipated what my needs would be. So one, I knew I would need an attorney, even though some people managed to navigate that process on their own. But I knew that a lot of the communication would come in Dutch. And to date, my Dutch is non-existent. So I said, I need a good attorney, and I would also need an accountant. So thankfully, going back to our previous conversation about leaning into your networks and having connections and networking, I reached out to a colleague who had a friend that worked in Amsterdam for a very long time, and she introduced me to her colleague who actually moved here on DAFT and successfully navigated that process and has been working here for several years. So I arranged a meeting with him. He told me all about his process. He recommended his attorney to me. We had a great conversation, and I spoke to the attorney. Felt like I could trust him and felt like he would steward this process really well. So engaged him in business and asked him his advice. I was like, I'm new here. I'm looking for an accountant. Do you have any recommendations? And he recommended my accountant, Hannah Helps, and I've been working with her ever since. So lean into your networks, anticipate your needs, ask the questions, because people are willing to help. You just have to be transparent about what your needs are and what the resources that you need.
People are very generous with information. They're very people want you to succeed, but it's also how you ask for support as well. So, I've come across scenarios in the past where sometimes people come in and they moan about, the bureaucracy or all of the different things that are in the Netherlands. When you actually step back, it's about being well organised and structured. And I think what you have to do is embrace that this is a really good place to set up. It's a really good place to, from a quality of life perspective, in kind of how you develop your business, it works very, very well. And I think you just have to go with it and accept there are some differences. And as you talk about the US kind of NL tax aspect, I remember mentoring somebody a few years ago who identified a niche in the market specifically for American citizens here, which was getting the taxes in order so that they would have the right to vote when they wanted to going forward. And this person has developed a business that has spread out into Benelux. So there's always a specialisation and something unique that you can bring. And all you have to do is ask. But it's the ik durf het niet te doen, I don't dare to, as they say in Dutch. And that's kind of the thing you just got to get over yourself and get out there. Nobody's going to go, come here. You have to go to them.
Definitely. And that's where I think expats are in a good position to start a business, because you've already changed, you've taken a leap of faith, building the parachute as you go. So you can't be shy. You've got to be curious. And I say to people that have landed here, and it's just like, if there's something you don't understand, you're going to have to keep asking until you do understand. We've got Google Translate, wonderful. But as a previous boss of mine used to say, it's a bag of words. It's words in English, but they still make no sense to me. And also asking for help. People say, well, why 33% chance of getting an answer? if you ask an expert a question, if they've got many years' experience, it takes 2 minutes to answer the question rather than asking AI and getting the wrong answer.
Yeah.
So if you ask the question, they're either going to say no, or you need to book an appointment and you're going to have to pay me some money, ignore you, or they might actually say yes. So why would you not? And this is with entrepreneurship. You need to put yourself out there, and the fact you did that and you found the right person.
But that's how it works. And everybody, every day I get people who call me who are not my client, and they just have a quick question. I just answer them. Because if I say I cannot answer it because you're not a client, it takes more time than to. Because I think no expat who is just arriving in the Netherlands can ask me a difficult question, because their knowledge about the system is not enough to ask. You also need to know something to ask a difficult question. Otherwise, you cannot do it.
That's really interesting. We're talking about barriers, and based on this conversation, sometimes we can become our own barrier. Yeah. So, like you said, get out of your own way. Right. Yes.
I don't know how you have, but in Holland we have a saying: you always have no yes for an answer. You can always get no. You always have yes for an answer. You always get no. So just ask.
Yeah. Exactly. It costs nothing to ask. And I think, what's important as well is that, when we talk about expats and expat entrepreneurs, when I first moved here, it was very much seen as being kind of what they would call the trailing spouse. So it was considered somebody who's very wealthy and we're just doing this as a hobby. And I remember going to an event here in The Hague where somebody described it as being like a knitting club, which was shocking. Wow. But actually, when you go in, you'll actually find that there are entrepreneurs that are focused in on niche areas around health and well-being, around innovation, around design, around bookkeeping, around creativity and writing. There are many different services and opportunities that are there. And I think what's wonderful as well when we look at younger people coming in is I'm working a lot with students here in Leiden and Rotterdam, where they're developing ideas that they take with them and they develop them for when they are leaving university. So it's a wonderful landscape. It's changed a lot, but there's almost like so many opportunities there, it's overwhelming. So you've got to step back and actually think about what's right for you. So even places like the World Trade Center here in The Hague, they have a business center, which is fantastic. I used that when I was starting out here, and they were just very trustworthy, go in and out, get the job done. And you just use these spaces, but you need to go in and step over the threshold. And that, I think, is the hardest thing when you're new here. You're stepping over the barrier to kind of go, am I welcome here? And you have to just go in and go, I belong here. You have to change your mind on those things.
Definitely. And I think that's where we first met, actually.
Yes.
That's quite some time ago.
Yeah.
Also, I see that people need to leave some of the perfectionism away. I'm going to do things in a sequential order. I'm going to finish thing, then publish thing, and do the thing. And I'm like, we need to do a little bit of everything every day. And some of it's outreach, some of it's being vulnerable, which is sharing what I'm developing. Because otherwise you can sit at home polishing it and then the world doesn't know what it is and they go ta-da in the world and nobody's there to receive it. So that is a vulnerability of entrepreneurship. It can be painful. Asking for feedback, it's not always a gift. It's not always the answer you want to hear.
I also see that a lot of people in the beginning are struggling with the notion that somebody might want to steal their idea.
Yeah.
And then what they do is they retreat and they build in solitude and they invest so much time and so much money into building something that they haven't even tested if the market wants it. And I think that is so detrimental because, first of all, whenever you're building something, it's you, the person who's building it. And that unique bit of you can never be stolen, can never be replicated by anybody. So I advocate sincerely for people to get over themselves, to be a little bit brave, to put themselves out there, because as we heard earlier in the comedy bit, entrepreneurship is risk. So you have to own that risk and you really have to teach your nervous system to tolerate that uncertainty because your resources are not infinite and you're going to need that feedback loop to keep feeding into your motivation in order to progress with the things that you're doing.
And not only a motivation to ensure that that thing that you're bringing, that you're building, is actually viable, feasible, relevant to the audiences that you want to serve. You mentioned that I'm a social designer. That is critical. We believe in going to the people who are most impacted by the problem to co-create solutions with them. And I think it's the same thing in building and then based on what they are saying, iterating on your business so it continually remains relevant.
Yeah.
And that's where perfectionism can actually trump your progress. Because if you're obsessing about creating the perfect thing without ever checking for it, you're going to create the perfect thing that nobody will want.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's an organisation based in Eindhoven called Gritted, and they're working a lot with the RVO kind of business development people, and they conducted research where they found that a lot of people who are starting businesses are focusing their energies on the wrong things, trying to perfect what's there rather than focusing in on what is the problem that I'm solving or the gap that I'm addressing and who are the people that I serve. And what's interesting is that the shift has moved towards getting your first customer, because you get your first customer, even if it's an imperfect offer, you can gradually fix it as you go forward. So you look at any technology company, they'll they will have this great piece of innovation, but when it goes to scale, there's always bugs, and they call it bugs. Well, we want perfection. So what's really healthy here, I find, is that it's about get the first customer, get the kind of the evangelical one who recommends you, and then build and adapt according to what your customer says. Yes. And it's really important, and you need to kind of get out of the textbooks and just talk to people, and you will, the Hague is a fantastic place for that. It's so diverse,
and the most valuable feedback that you will ever get is from your direct clients. Your friends, your family, their supporters. They're amazing to have. You need those in your corner as well. But the actual thing that matters as a business owner is your feedback from your clients. Those are the people that are going to help you the most in perfecting or changing your service or your product, because they are the ones that benefit from it, and they've already paid money for it. So they are valuing your work.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think what I was mentioned in the beginning, when you start your company in the Netherlands, it's developing. You have an idea, and then you think, oh, maybe nobody's waiting for my idea, but if I do it like that, maybe they're waiting for me. Or maybe when I explain it, why it is good for them, then maybe this is going to work. So, and that is how it works a little bit. And for us too, because when we have a new client, I always start to think like, oh, he's doing this business, so probably he has this and this kind of problems, or this is what this bottlenecks he's going to face. And then I just ask, because I want to understand the business, and if I understand the business, I can advise a little bit better. And so for us, every time we have a new client doing something new, we also have to figure out how we can serve them the best, even after years and years of experience.
And just being open to learn to new things. I think one thing, if there's one kind of tool to recommend if people were trying to find out or learn a few skills, there is a platform called Entrepreneurship for All, which was published by the European Union last year. And they have a series of tools where whether you're kind of going, I think I have a business idea, or I'm not sure, you can go in online and look at these on-demand resources. They're in English, and it's designed just to get you thinking. But you still need to, so that can help with knowledge, and it doesn't cost anything. And then you go and you engage with people who can help you develop. But you also have to remember that you know more about your business than anybody else. And even, whether you're new to a country, you still have to understand the environment that you're in. And this context of understanding is a key part of entrepreneurship. And also accept when you fall flat in your face and you go, that didn't work, what can I do differently to move forward? And I've had epics like that, and that's how you do it. It isn't a case of, I created this and it's perfect. It's not like that. It's not like that at all.
No. I used a mind trick to help me in the beginning stages, and I've learned this from a professor at uni. He said the acronym of FAIL stands for first attempt in learning, and that really helped with overcoming my perfectionism and seeing failure as part of my journey towards success. Whereas if I would just be stuck in whatever failure, then I would have never progressed. if I look at my failures as valuable lessons to draw some insights from and to change or reiterate something, I think this is also a mindset shift that every entrepreneur needs to cultivate quickly.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I was on an entrepreneurship course 2 years ago, and one of the things that stuck with me, they said, if you're not ashamed of your first launch, then you launch too late. And I was like, ouch, that really hurts. And also, we dream of the thing. And, you know, you've got to be ready for those failures. And I've shared a few times that I sort of laugh in the face of defeat. That sounds like I'm a little bit crazy, but it's just like they're learning points, and you cannot be in this unicorn rainbow of happy path. We've got to be aware and be ready for the risk that things don't go right.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think it's a mindset shift of not seeing failure as final. It's the end. What am I going to do? But it's a redirection.
Yes.
Right.
And maybe the same idea can work for a different client perfectly.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't mean that your idea is bad. It is just not the right idea for this for this person. So that is.
And I think it's also fine to, you know, in Dutch you have a saying which is klein maar fijn, which is like, you know, there's kind of that it doesn't have to be a giant company, you know. So when I first moved here, I originally had an idea where I was going in and I wanted to go more international. And then, you know, I had caring responsibilities, I had a young child, all of those things, and I had to change my idea of what my view of entrepreneurship was. So you end up creating something that's very different. And I think what you have to do is, you know, you have to remember that a small business is as good and as powerful as a really large business. And over 97% of businesses across Europe have an employee level of 15 employees or less. So they are the drivers of local communities. So don't kind of think you're failing because it's only you or two people or people working part-time. You're helping put food on the table for somebody else. And it's the basics of that. Unicorns are great, but really they're few and far between, and focus on grafting, first customer, get the job done, and then let them come back to you. Simple as that.
Lovely. Okay. For many expat founders, arriving in the Netherlands means starting from zero. No contacts, no network, no warm introductions. So my next question, when an expat founder arrives in the Netherlands with no network at all, what opportunities do you believe they actually have that they might not have seen yet? I'm going to go to Hans because I'm curious whether anybody says, I've registered my business with you. There's no money coming in. I don't know anybody.
We have a few of those clients.
Oh, yeah?
But, you know, I always say to clients that this might be an open door. You know, if you don't register at the Chamber of Commerce, you're not going to start at all. So you have to start somewhere. There's going to be a point. And maybe to register yourself, maybe it is some point where you think, okay, now I have to do something. Because if you don't do that, then you don't have to do anything because you don't have a business. There's nothing. So I think, and what I see is that every expat, regardless where they come from, within a month they found people who come from their own country. It is really easy. I remember I had 2 aunts who was immigrated to Canada in the 50s, and then it was really popular because even the Dutch government promoted it to go to, you even get paid to go to Canada or to New Zealand and I think within 1 month they didn't speak English because in the 50s the school system was not like they didn't speak English, and within 1 month they were taken into the Dutch community in Toronto. So and I think it still works like that, and And if you take it from there, because everybody feels a little bit like, you call it unrooted, that you, and if you have people from the same culture, you right away have a bond, and this bond is taking you from there. So I think that is how it works. And as I see, and if I hear you, everybody uses this network, and that's how it works.
I think if you don't have a network, for example, or if you haven't found the people from your country yet, I would say start with your everyday contacts and build on those relationships. In the beginning, I didn't have money to afford renting an office. I barely had 2 clients, right? But because I was going for a coffee in the same cafe every single day, at some point I just started talking to the owner and complaining about this. And he was super kind, and he said, well, we have an upstairs space that nobody uses. If you want, you can just come here. And for me, that actually built my business because it saved me in that moment. So I would say start with what you're regularly doing. If you're going to a cafe regularly, talk to people, tell them that you're doing something or you're trying to do something, because you never know where help might come from. If you say hello a couple of times to your neighbor, share something about what you're doing, because again, you need a little encouragement or something that you haven't even thought about.
And never let disappointment stop you, because that's going to happen. You know, that is even if you're not an expat, then you still get that if you want something, not everything works. So if you get disappointed, don't just go on. That's what I think what you should do. Yeah.
And sometimes, to kind of when you're going through that questioning and you're thinking, what am I doing here? There are days when it's extremely difficult as well. And I think it's also recognizing that just because you're in another country, you could have exactly the same experience if you were in your own home country. So it's more about how you choose to move forward. But if it goes on too long, then you need to get support. You need to go and talk to somebody. But sometimes we all have off days. There are days when I'm working and I'm thinking, what on earth am I doing this for? And then on other days I'm going, actually, I love it. So you've got to recognise that as well. And I think life's too short. But I'm so grateful that I've had so many opportunities being based here, because it is so international. And I think sometimes we take things for granted. And I think there are wonderful opportunities here. That's really all I can say. Yeah.
That question brings to mind a quote statement by author, thought leader Brené Brown. She said, many of us are conditioned by this culture of not enough. Like when you wake up in the morning, oh, I didn't get enough sleep. When you're putting your head to sleep at night, you're like, oh, I didn't do enough today. Right? And I think as an entrepreneur, sometimes you can get locked into that kind of negative thought pattern of I'm not doing enough, I'm not enough, and that can be very unhealthy and it can stunt your progress. So I think it's important to take stock of all the strength, the resources it took for you to arrive here in the Netherlands to begin with, and think about the different skill sets that you have and what you could do alongside building your business, right? So you're building your business, but you can also volunteer, right? But based on your interests and your passions, the things that you really care about, but you can also diversify the work that you do. For example, I'm an adjunct professor at Webster Leiden, working with international students, and that's what I did previously before coming here. So I believe that as you do those things, your network will continue to grow, and eventually that will pour into the development of your business as well.
Definitely. I have an exercise for that I love sharing with people, because I think it's true. We really need resilience in order to overcome our off days. And often I see people not being aware of all the amazing things that they've already done. So you know how we all do to-do lists, to do this, to do that, to do this? Well, I'd like to invite everybody to take a minute and also build another list called I Did It list, and really list all the things that you have accomplished so far. Because we take it for granted so easily. Oh, I went to uni and I have a diploma and I did this professional training and I started a business in the Netherlands and I have a website and I have clients. And you forget to keep count of these things as valuable and important that a previous version of you would only dream of having, and now you have them. So by taking this realistic approach to what you have already accomplished, that helps your resilience so much, and it really can be such a nice anchor when you're feeling that you're drifting. Go back to your I did it list, and you're going to see how good you feel about yourself.
Yeah, but I think that success, we accept it as normal. That is the norm, you know, we are successful. And as soon as something doesn't work, we start to feel bad about it. That's really strange, because actually you can also see, for me, you can also see success as something extraordinary. That you did something and it really was successful. And the other one didn't work, so I have to do something else. So, but to think constantly in failure and success, I think that is not necessary, because, you know, I think for me, but it already took me 30 years to do that, but Before that, I was afraid that if I didn't work on a Saturday, now I would never work. I was lazy because I didn't do anything. And if I didn't work till 7 o'clock in the evening, I was lazy. And I've skipped all that because I'm not lazy. And then my father, he said, Hans, if you cannot earn it in 40 hours, you should do something else. And that is correct. Then get another job. So now I even work less than 40 hours because I quit at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Yeah, maybe I do something at home, but I think I work 7 hours a day maximum. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's just building on that is this aspect of right across Europe is the underrepresentation of women and underrepresentation of some groups within the entrepreneurial community. I think sometimes when somebody turns up with a business idea, you have no idea what barriers they've had to overcome in order to get into the room. And I think in particular with, let's say if we have female entrepreneurs and shortage of childcare and all of those things, that sometimes, you have a business where maybe it'll still develop, but it might be slower to develop than if you had no responsibilities at all. So you've got to look at entrepreneurship as being kind of almost like a patchwork quilt as part of your life and not the only part of your identity, because it's a reflection of who you are, but there are other things that are really important as well. And I think anybody who can earn money that could either pay the rent, but even if it's not enough to pay the rent but contributes towards someone's education, etc., that in my world is entrepreneurship, whether it's small or absolutely mega. And you've got to really respect people for that as well, I think.
Yeah. Okay, we've just got a few minutes left, so I'd just like to go around and ask this one question. What is one piece of advice you would give to an expat entrepreneur? I'm going to pick Nakia, the freshest one in the room.
I love quotes. They stop me in my tracks every time I see them, and I have to reflect on them. So I came across this quote the other day, and I hope I get it right in this moment. But I believe it states, entrepreneurship is realizing that the person you have to become is harder than building the business itself. Mm-hmm. I was like, whoa, that landed. Because I felt as though, even though I've been doing this for under a year, I feel like I've grown so much. It stretched me. That resilience piece, the mindset shift, all of that is part of the process. And I'm learning to embrace it. And I'm learning to not, get stuck in, I didn't do enough, or I'm not enough, or I still have so far to go, and I'm counting my wins, right? And I believe that as you do that, the small things, those daily disciplines, they will compound, and eventually you'll get to your desired destination. You just have to stay the course.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Adina.
From the destination point, which I feel is super important, my thing, or the thing that helped me the most, and I try to give it back to all the entrepreneurs I work with, is a real authentic anchor into their why. Simon Sinek style, right?
Oh, yeah.
Go back to your original motivation, because when that spark of entrepreneurship, where the idea came from of building your business, you had a reason for it. And that reason is worth pursuing. And that's something that I feel people need to constantly reevaluate and check with themselves. Is my motivation still there? Is this still valuable? Does it make sense to me? And another component here is allow yourself to define a quits moment, because maybe sometime your life circumstances will change. Maybe something you will realize that the stress that you're putting yourself through is not worth it. There's no shame in choosing for more balance in your life or for a more secure, steady, traditional career if entrepreneurship is taking too much of a toll for you.
And I think that's what some people fear, is I went out there and told everybody I was doing this and I'm not doing it anymore. And it was just like, not everybody heard that story. So don't worry, move on to the next thing. Yeah. Is it worse to stay in the thing that's not making you happy, not making you money, and it's too difficult?
No. I see entrepreneurship just as a vehicle towards your destination. And whatever you imagine your life to be, entrepreneurship is a way to get you there. But it's not the make it or break it. It's not your identity. It's not all or nothing.
Yeah. Life is dynamic. It's constantly changing, and you're allowed to change with it.
You're allowed to change your mind. You're you're your own boss.
I think so, yes. Okay.
hardship isn't for everyone. And, you know, the statistics are that I think up to 1 in 5 businesses fail over, 1 in 3 businesses fail over a 5-year period. So, you know, it's one where it's for some people and not. But if there was a piece of advice I would give, it's kind of 3 things. It's about, if we talk about the Netherlands, it's paperwork, it's people, and it's purpose. And if you just have that, keep it really simple.
Hans, how about you?
I would advise that all entrepreneurs focus on their business, on their skills, and their trust. I think that is the most important thing. And I understand that you should be organized, but there are ways to do that. You can just, you know, you can hire people for that, or you can. But it is basically about your skills and your knowledge, and because that is what we are selling at the moment. So that is, and that is the most important.
Oh, there's so many. I'd probably say, and circle back to the, you know, we don't want to share things because somebody's going to steal our ideas, is collaboration. I didn't know when I started collaborating with one particular person how much visibility and how much it helps her as well. My wonderful photographer. And it was just natural, it just felt good. So we just do that. So that was definitely one for me. Go on, you had something to add?
One more thought quickly came to my mind, and that's feelings are not facts. They're information, and you should pay attention to them.
Yes.
And you should process them, but they're not facts. There's so many times, and I'm sure we all can relate to this, where we just didn't feel it. Yeah. But we decided to go to that networking event despite our feelings, and then we made a great contact, had a great conversations. So I think it's important to identify your feelings, but also not be constrained or hold yourself back by your feelings. Just show up in spite of them, because, you never know what's on the other side of that.
Like
sure. Emotions are like waves, you just gotta ride them out.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. They're always going to be there. Yeah. Expat entrepreneurship, I can't say that word, entrepreneurship isn't always easy, but conversations like this remind us that no one has to build a business alone. Or say entrepreneurship again. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and don't forget to tune in to the election special next month. So we're almost at the end of the show. That wraps up our segment on expat entrepreneurship. A sincere thank you to my wonderful guests, Hans, Sinead, Adina and Nakia, for sharing those invaluable perspectives today. To our viewers across the Netherlands and abroad, thank you for being part of the Expaterience community. Any parting thoughts you'd like to share with people? Is it just go and try it?
Definitely go do it.
I'm a big believer in prototyping. Prototype your ideas.
It's worth
live them
every
out
pain.
loud.
Definitely.
I always, say if you don't want to wake up in 10 years' time and go, what if? So, if the business idea doesn't work out, you learn from it and you move on. That's what happens, and you just go for it.
Okay. If you missed any part of today's broadcast or want to share these insights with your network, this episode is available on demand anytime on our website. Before you leave, another quick reminder to mark your calendars for our local election special on Saturday 28th of February in the run-up to the March elections. As an international, you may be eligible to vote, and we will be here to guide you through the process and the issues that impact your life here. I'm Julie Taylor. On behalf of the entire team, thank you for watching, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you.